On today's episode of Speak Shame with Dr. Connie Corrali.
I married a man who dictated life, who was very emotionally cruel and sexually cruel. But we don't talk about that also. That's a whole other thing. It talks about their sex life, especially back in 1980. Like, oh, wow, this was closed door stuff. Take one bit of my first 50 years away at all, because I wouldn't be me now.
Hello, remarkable woman. I'm your host, Dr. Connie Corrali, medical doctor, life coach, and survivor of sexual violence. And you're listening to Speak Shame, a collection of inspiring conversations with remarkable women who have faced and overcome adversity. By sharing their stories, my hope is that you may find strength, connection, and hope in your own journey, and that shame itself loses its power. So sit back, relax, and don't forget to follow the show. Before we start this episode, please be aware that we'll be discussing sexual violence, which could upset or trigger some people. I've provided links for support in the show notes. Joining me on this week's episode is the wonderful Lorene Roberts. Lorene is a holistic counsellor and root cause therapist dedicated to helping women heal from life's toughest transitions, including divorce. She understands the profound emotional challenges that come with separation and works with her clients to process grief, rebuild confidence, and rediscover their sense of self. So thank you so much, Lorene, for joining me today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, let's kick things off then. I'm going to just ask you a little bit about your life, but we're going to do it in a slightly different way. So if your life story was turned into a book, describe for me what happens in chapter 1.
I've written a book on that. Called Crazy Stupid Love.
We could take the chapter straight from there.
Absolutely. Unlocking Life's Lesson is the tagline of the book. So that's exactly what I wrote it about. And it's really funny. Like, I wrote it around 2013-14. Now I feel it's cringeworthy for me. I'm over it, done that, I've healed. And it's quite funny. And I look at it, but there are so many amazing lessons in it that I'd like to actually get it back and redo it again, concentrating more on the lessons, because it's the lessons that you take away that makes you heal.
Yes.
And if you get those lessons, then you don't heal and you repeat the patterns over and over again. And at the time I wrote it, I think it was a bit catty, because I was still bitter and angry. There was still that element within me that I hadn't eradicated. And now I just look back and I go, oh, wow, if that had happened, if I hadn't done this, if I had have reacted that way, the outcome would have been so different. So I haven't answered your question at all. But bottom line is, my mother wasn't the mother that anyone would have wanted. She wasn't loving. She was very, very judgmental. And I look back now and I realise that she was narcissistic. It was all about her and her looking good and having the perfect looking children, basically. So being narcissistic, and I was the second born with a very big gap in between. So I watched my sister's behaviour and I didn't like it, and I was never going to behave like her. You know what? I look at it now and I go, you throw a tantrum, you get what you want. Maybe I should have thrown tantrums because I wouldn't ask for things, because I was told if you ask for it, you won't get it. So I never asked for things. So learning to ask what I want is one of my biggest lessons in life. Learning that no one can give you what you need, what you want, if they don't know. And I'm never going to be like her. So I never did that. So, yes. So then I went on and I married a man that was just like my mother. When he said to me, if you ever ask me for anything, the answer will be no. But if you don't ask, then there's a chance that you'll get it. Well, Oh, that's right. I was allowed to ask once and that was it. Well, that meant that I never asked things again. And I married a man who dictated life, who was very emotionally cruel and sexually cruel. But we don't talk about that also. That's a whole other thing. Who talks about their sex life, especially back in 1980, like, oh, wow, this was closed door stuff. So I didn't know what was going on was wrong, was it normal, and wasn't acceptable. To me, I was the wife and had to do what I had to do. And that's how I did go to my mother-in-law, hello, and she said, listen, love, sometimes you've just got to do what you got to do. Holy cow.
Gosh. Oh, God.
Now, good daughter-in-law, I did exactly what I had to do. But
Yeah.
it wasn't acceptable. And now I think about it. And do you know what? People, they don't know what to do when I do speak up. It's quite funny, actually. It's still uncomfortable for people. It's
Absolutely.
still uncomfortable for people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for speaking up, and thank you for being so open, so honest, because I think people need to hear these stories. And I also think that there are other people out there who might be going through a similar thing who will now be like, right, I'm not alone. And I picked up on the lessons you said, the lessons that you learned along the way.
You know, it's funny, the other day I put my phone in to be repaired and I had to sit and wait. What do you do when you don't have a phone and you're sitting somewhere? It's really like, oh, sitting in a cafe and they don't have newspapers anymore. And it's like, la, 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 la. So I went to the car and got out my first book and I started reading it. And I'm thinking, oh. Then I read a bit where, you know, very well before we were married, we were in the lounge room of mum and dad's house. And he sitting in a beanbag, which didn't have many beans in it. So we're virtually laying on the floor. And he decides he wants to have sex and mum and dad are in the room next door. And I'm going, no, no. And he's going, yes.
Yeah.
And I eventually went, listen, if I just lay here, don't do anything, don't make any noise, Dad won't come in. It'll get it over and done with and we can get out of here real fast. Well, that's what happened. Now, I look back now and I go, holy shit, he raped me. Because I said, no, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
But I couldn't argue with him because mum and dad would have heard and dad would have come in. So, you know, I just let it happen. And I looked back now and I go, if I had got up, kicked him in the balls, said, get out of here, I'm not doing it, he would have left and we probably never would have got married. But I never stood up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm now realised you cannot have a perpetrator if you don't have a victim willing to be dominated. Because if I hadn't said that and absolutely gone ballistic at him, honestly, because he would have gone out the door and said, well, I'm not coming back here. The way you treat me. And I'd be like, yeah, that's fine. I treat you because I want respect.
Yeah. This is it.
And that is taking ownership of what happened. And it's very hard when you're just newly out of a relationship to actually see that. It takes a lot of healing to really see it in a different light.
Yeah.
So do I blame him? Oh, yeah, the man's an asshole. But at the same time, I allowed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And these are, as you mentioned, the lessons and the learning and looking at things in a different way. What I'd be fascinated to know is, how did you get to that stage where you started to see things differently? What was your journey to that point like?
It's interesting you say that. I've just created a course. It's called the 5 Steps to Emotional Freedom. And in the beginning of it, I said, this may not be your first course. And you might not do this course once or twice. You might just constantly do it. And you do. You go over the same stuff time and time again to get to the bottom thing. And that's root cause therapy. It's like you need to get rid of the surface stuff, then you get rid of the next layer. We are onions. You peel off the brown outer layer of the onion, and then you get your white layer. And then the white layer, on top of that, there's this little membrane. You need to pull that membrane off before you can take the next layer off. And then there's another little membrane, and it just goes on and on. We are onions. And you just need to keep digging, but you need to be honest with yourself as well. And all other ballparkers. Being honest with yourself and to be actually stand up and be able to own, he wouldn't have done this if I had stood up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's fault on both sides, regardless of what he did to me, was disgusting, disgraceful. And he has to live with that. I don't have to live with that. But I have to live with, I didn't stand up.
Yeah.
I didn't protect myself.
Yeah.
I didn't have the self-worth. I didn't have the self-belief.
Mhm.
And now I do.
Yeah. As you describe it, these onions, these sort of layers that we peel back and we realise that actually it goes much deeper, and often we think of things at a surface level, but you're absolutely right. There's so many layers to it. I'd be interested to know, what do you feel was your turning point when you thought, this isn't right, I need to do something?
Well, that's a whole other story on its own. I was the perfect wife. That was my mission in life. And I remember sitting in the car, and I was listening to Tony Robbins at the time. I'd bought a whole pile of his CDs, and this is about 2008 or 9. And I was listening to these CDs, and Tony Robbins said, you cannot change anyone else. You can only change yourself. And by changing yourself, you will change people around you, but you can't change people around you. You have to change yourself. And I remember at the time sitting in the car, and my ex-husband was in the garage cleaning up. And I remember sitting there just crying, going, I can't change him. He's going to be like this forever. And this is my life because I can't leave him. I am not capable of looking after myself. I don't know what I would do. I am just a person on my own. I have to stay, and I have to put up with this. And I have to be just like his mother, who put up with a terrible relationship as well. And I just have to live her life till the day I die. I was going nowhere.
Yeah.
And, I look back and I am so strong. I do not like infidelity. So I am so very dedicated to my marriage. But I'm grateful this other woman came along and stole my husband, and he left me. Now, at the time, I was devastated. I was so broken, and I didn't know how I was going to survive. I didn't believe I was worthy of anything. I didn't believe that I was needed in this world. I'm broken.
Yeah.
So looking at that, it's the best thing that ever happened to me, because I had to get up and I had to pick myself up. I had to find out who I was. I had to discover myself. I had to work out, what I liked in life, what I wanted in life. I had to start from scratch. Now, we were 18 when I first got together, so I lost myself at 18. So I basically had to go back to that 18-year-old. And I look at my 50s now as being very much like my 20s, as like everyone else's 20. That discovery period was my 50s.
Yeah.
So, yes, I was never going anywhere. So how did I get there? I got forced there. And it's the best thing that ever happened, Jill.
Yeah.
It's
When you talk about that, it reminds me of something that someone said to me once about, we do the best that we can at the time with the skills and the knowledge that we have at the time.
Yes.
And that moment where you said you were listening to Tony Robbins and that realization of he's not going to change, I'm not going to change, this is it for the rest of my life. And these events that then occurred with him having an affair that then brought you to this point where you're discovering yourself again. And I wonder, you talked about being so low, so down. How did you come to that decision that actually, no, I am going to start self-discovery, I'm going to pick myself up? What did that look like?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, actually. My mother was alive at that stage, and then she got sick, and then I went in to see her in hospital, and I bumped into a very, very close friend's sister. Now, she had separated from her husband, oh, 30 years prior. And she said to me, she said, "Oh, that bastard, and what he did to you." And the bitterness in her voice, "All men are bastards," she's saying it. And I remember looking at her and going, "I don't want to be like you and be bitter 30 years on.
Yeah.
I am not going to hold on to this and be," as she was really twisted inside. You could just
Mhm,
see pain. She was feeling my pain, and it wasn't even my pain. She was feeling her own pain as she's talking about.
mhm,
She was so bitter and twisted. And my thing was, I am not going to be like you.
mhm, mhm,
I
mhm.
am going to get over this.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I'm going to do, because at that stage, I still didn't know who I was. And I needed to get through my mother's passing before I really could move
Yes.
on anyhow. I had
Yeah.
that job of your last parent dying when you've just got to be there. Well, that sort of hit me on top of it. So it was like, yeah, it was a domino effect at the time.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So that's what moved me on. The other thing that really got me was my daughter had a beautiful Marama dog, and it
Mhm,
used to sleep at my door. And I knew that dogs, and it wasn't my dog, and I don't particularly, I'm not connected to dogs, and this dog was never connected to me. But I knew that animals sat with people who were dying. That was another
mhm,
thump of me. Why is your dog not sleeping in your bedroom with you, sleeping at my door?
mhm.
Oh, hell, I must be in a really bad place if the dog is sleeping outside my door, you know? So there was a couple of, hits on the head to get me going.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, I'm really, really grateful. One of my passions has always been self-development. So my
Mhm,
ex hated it because I would say things and come out with things. But that was the thing that I threw myself into. That was the
mhm.
way to get out of this.
Yes.
So I had learnt enough to know if I don't change me, then I will just curl up and die.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and there must have been a survival thing in there as well to make these
Yeah.
things that, must be just deep inside that we don't realise.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think so many people who'll be listening and maybe are in the same position are thinking, maybe this is what I need to do and start working on myself as well. And what would you say were the things that you found most useful? I know you talked about the course that you've created. What are the things that you learnt along the way that helped you then develop?
You have to have determination. You have to have resilience, probably more than anything. I can
Mhm,
give you the tools, which I do it. This freebie course is it's just a no-brainer course,
mhm,
but you've got to have resilience. You've got to have determination.
mhm,
And I'm
mhm,
sure there's
mhm.
going to be a lot of people who will download it and say, yeah, 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 I'll do it, but they don't.
Yeah.
That's the key to life,
Yeah.
actually.
When you talk about resilience and determination, leads me on to the next question, because I was going to talk about how those experiences have shaped who you are today. How would you compare yourself today to the self you were when you were married to your ex-husband?
To be honest, that's probably one of the things that is intrinsically me is I am focused and determined. Where
Mm,
being married, I was determined to be the best wife and the best mother.
yeah.
That's all my determination was. And I honestly believe I succeeded to the best of my ability with the knowledge that I had. Trust me, I've messed up royally in so many different ways, but I couldn't have done it any better at the time. So, when he left was the same time, the youngest turned 18. So it was like he didn't have to be responsible. So he just dumped the adult kids on me.
Yeah.
And I could then walk and find me. And that's what I have found is my own personal determination and my own personal resilience. And I have those in spades, and it probably is intrinsic within my whole DNA.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you talked about low self-worth that you had as well at the time that he left, and building that up again. What did you notice were the things that helped you turn that around and be like, no, I am worthy? You talked a little bit about almost having to go back to your 18-year-old self. What steps were you taking at the time?
It's interesting because I was discovering things, but I was very aware that I was discovering things, which is probably makes me a little bit different, I suppose, in a way. One of my biggest beliefs, and he'd always told me, that we don't need you. And I just felt totally superfluous in the whole family. I felt that, I was only there to do the menial work. I wasn't needed. I wasn't wanted. And I felt that the family would be better off without me. And I absolutely believed that 1,000%.
Yeah.
And after Mum passed, I had nowhere to live. I had no income. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I'd always had health challenges with chronic fatigue and so forth. So, I'd always managed my levels of energy and what I do. So I wasn't capable of going out and getting a full-time job and working for someone, and I'd never worked for someone, so I didn't know how I was going to manage that. So at the time, I actually went, okay, I'm going around the world. I used my credit card because at the time I had no money, but I had 50,000 limit on my credit card, and I knew that there was money coming. So I actually spent, look, all up, it was about 12 months, but I came and went a couple of times. But I spent those months traveling on my own around the world. When I left, I set my children up so they were self-sufficient on their own. That's all I had to do. That's what I felt all I had to do because I didn't feel they needed me. I didn't feel they wanted me, and I felt that I was a nuisance in their way, and they would be much better off if I wasn't around. So if I died while I was going around the world, they would celebrate because it's better for them. And that's what I believed. 3 months into the trip, I realised that I was actually not the most useless person in the family. I was actually the linchpin in the middle where everyone went around. And I suddenly found that my kids did need me. And there was a place in their lives for me, which I didn't believe before.
Yeah.
And it was actually going away around the world and a way that I discovered that was probably my biggest learning out of everything. I mean, not so much doing that trip, but the most profound thing for me as a person, that's where I found my worth.
Yeah.
I found some worth for me to start building on, probably is more of the.
Yeah. That's such a lovely story to hear. So often we hear about people feeling like they're not needed and people be better off without them. And so to hear this story of that realization of actually, you were the linchpin that everyone went around and that unlocked your worth and realization in you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wonder how your journey has connected you with other people who have faced similar challenges.
Oh, look, I understand where they're coming from. And I people will say things to me and I go, oh, and I can see the levels going down and the depth in it, and they're talking about the grass on top of the ground. Well, guess what? The grass is covering all the rest of the stuff underneath it, but I can see that psychological dig, below it. But if I was to tell them, hey, listen, below you've got a Roman city, they would go, oh, this one's crazy, But I can see it there. So, okay, let's just work with getting the grass off. And then we'll move a few bits of the dirt, see what you can find. Oh, there's a reality.
I love that. And how did you get into this, I suppose, because you talked about traveling around the world, and prior to that, you didn't have anywhere to live, you hadn't worked before. How did you then turn into a holistic counsellor, a root cause therapist? When did that journey begin?
Well, I think, as I said to you, I've always had this passion for self-development.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that as soon as he said he was going, I remember saying to my mother, that's good because I know I want to do this course and it costs $13,000 and he would go ballistic and I wouldn't be allowed to do it. If he's gone, somehow I'm going to work out how to do it. And I did. And that was the first thing I did. That was my first thing I did. Basically, and I also didn't know my strengths at the time. So if anyone's done Clifton strengths and so forth, my number one strength is strategic, so I can work out how we get anywhere. My number two is learner. So, I spend hours every day watching YouTube, listening to people talk, listening to podcasts like this because the guests know so much. So I listen to a lot of stuff. I'm always learning. I'm always signing up for things and doing different courses. And that's how I got there. And then I spent a year studying to become a counsellor.
Yeah.
So, and I basically did that. So I got that title that I can now use and now I'm qualified rather than I have all this knowledge. But I was talking to a psychologist the other day and he said, look, I learnt more the first year I was out actually treating people than I ever did 6 years at school. And it's true. The more people deal with, the more issues you see, the more things. Yeah. So a lot of self-learning in there, a lot of self-learning. Probably a lot of the self-learning is actually far more deep. And better than any of the traditional stuff that you get.
And certainly the experiences that you've had, I mean, when you someone talks about something surface level and you're able to see immediately what's going on at the roots, that's priceless. It's really invaluable to have. And what would you hope that the listeners, potentially listeners who may be going through a similar thing, what do you want them to take away from hearing your story?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't know if I could actually put it, but believe in themselves. But before you can believe in yourself, you've got to put yourself first and do the work. And then the belief will come because you will see it and learn. It's self-belief that is that is the game changer.
Yeah.
But that
so
doesn't
true.
come. That doesn't come straight away.
Yeah.
It's all must happen before that.
Yeah, so true. I think that's such a valuable thing for people to hear. And I guess the other thing actually is if you had to speak to your younger self now, what would you say to her?
That's interesting you say. I would not take one bit of my first 50 years away at all because I wouldn't be me now. So, if you were to start again, where would you start? Oh, look, I'd start way back in childhood and say, stand up for yourself. Don't be a good girl. Don't conform. Same time, that was my journey and I had to take it, become me now.
Yeah.
And I am so proud of myself now. And I love who I am now. I
Yeah.
couldn't love who I am now if I hadn't have
Yeah.
been through what I've been through.
Yeah.
So, would I want to be 30 again? Absolutely not. Unless I can take what I've got here.
That's it. That's it. And if people want to work with you, because I'm sure there are going to be people listening who are like, "Oh, Lorene's is just amazing." Where can they find you?
Probably the first thing you need to do is go to the website. On the website, you can book an appointment with me. I do have 3 15-minute times. I don't know whether they're quite friendly for you, but we can certainly get in touch. And and I can see you before or after hours for you somewhere because we just never match up. Also, go and have a look at the free course. It's not quite finished, getting very close to it. So it's there. So www. Now, Lorene is Lorene. It's a little bit different. Roberts, Roberts. That's easy.com. So you can always get me through that. You can find me on LinkedIn. You'll find me on Facebook too. It's not easy to find me on Facebook. There's a few too many of us.
I will put the links in the show notes, though, definitely.
The website's the best way.
Okay. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
brilliant.
There's a contact on it. Yeah.
And the contact that, and I want to just find out from you, Lorene, is there anything you feel like, oh, actually, I want to say that. I want to make that point.
There's a lot of stuff that you hear from people and it's all right, but you've got to, I walk my walk. I talk my talk. Work. And sometimes, it can be boring and it can be, but I've done this before. You just got to keep going.
Yeah. Keep going. Self-belief.
Yes. So many people give up when they're just about to break through and then they end up, back in the same spot. Keep going. Keep going. So, grab the free course and just do it 10 times if you need to, because today you're peeling off the brown bit of the onion. Tomorrow you'll be peeling off that first little layer of skin. Then just keep going, doing it.
Wise words. And I always like to end by asking, if you had to name one remarkable woman, who would it be? And this is someone who's inspired you. So who would it be and why?
Inspired me. It's really interesting. Like, my mother inspired me to be the woman that she wasn't. A lot of people have inspired me for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
And we are all multiple, complex people. So, there's bits and pieces of us that are all inspiring.
Yeah. So true.
Maggie Thatcher, first of the UK, strong, powerful woman. I don't know much more than that, but that's inspiring.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For Winfrey, stands up for what she believes, helps people. How amazing. There's so many.
Yeah. And you know what, Lorene, your story is inspiring too. And I really do believe that people listening to this who may be able to see themselves in your story are going to be given so much hope to see your journey and where you are now. So I really appreciate you giving up the time to be here. And thank you so much for being my guest today.
Well, look, my aim is if I can just help one woman out there and be her inspiration for changing her life, then I have absolutely killed it. You know what I mean? I've won.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
would love to inspire more than one woman. I would love to be able to, and I've already helped.
Yeah.
But, you know, yeah, that's what drives
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
drives me.
And that's the beauty of sharing your stories.
I think one of the things I'm actually most proudest of, and this might
Mhm.
sound silly, is I actually can speak up and tell my stories
Yes.
because a lot of women can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of people, yeah, they just, and even if they can, there's the fear of judgment is so high that they won't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because I can, I know I need to,
Yeah.
not for me,
Yeah.
but for women that can't.
You've hit the nail on the head there. Absolutely. I mean, this is really the basis of this show as well, providing that hope, providing inspiration so that people know that they're not alone. So thank you so much, Lorene. I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Speak Shame with Dr. Connie Corrali. And thank you so much to Lorene Roberts for being my guest on this week's show. Please take a look at the show notes for information on Lorene's social media handles so that you can connect with her. If you'd like to join the community, head over to @Dr. Connie Corrali or @SpeakShame on Instagram, or join the private group Speak Shame with Dr. Connie Corrali on Facebook. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to get a new episode every other Thursday. Until next time, take care.